Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. They introduced him on a rainy Monday morning, the kind where even coffee tasted like resignation. Ryan Wells, our new Director of Operations, fresh from Stanford. MBA, tech incubator darling. A few years with a flashy consultancy that worshipped at the altar of disruption. He wore confidence, like it was a second skin. All tailored suits and micro-expressions that screamed, "I'm here to fix what you didn't know was broken." He didn't greet anyone, just strolled through the floor, flanked by HR and our CEO, nodding once at the open space layout like he was assessing a battlefield. When he finally spoke at the all-hands meeting that afternoon, his voice was calm, rehearsed. Change is a mindset, not a phase. I'm here to move this company into its next chapter. There was no applause. Just the sound of an intern's iPad clicking shut too loudly. I sat 3 rows from the back, scribbling idle notes in a worn-out moleskin. I've been at our company for 8 years. Long enough to survive 3 restructurings, 2 office moves, and 1 failed merger that nearly ate us whole. My name is Lynette, officially an analyst on paper, unofficially the person who keeps the entire left wing of this business vertical from imploding. I watched Ryan with quiet interest. He was one of those reformer types, bright-eyed, eager to innovate. But what most of them never realize is that innovation without context is just chaos in a designer suit. I'd seen his type before. They arrived with big ideas, buzzwords, and a dream of revolution. Most left before the ink dried on their first performance review. The rest left ruins. Over the next few days, Ryan made his presence felt. He walked fast, talked faster. Everything was urgent. Inefficiency was his enemy, and he wielded slack like a sword. He scheduled meetings during lunch hours and handed out feedback like party favors. "We need to cut the fat," he said in one meeting. "Streamline workflows. Remove legacy drag." I was legacy drag. He didn't say it to my face, of course. He didn't have to. He said it in the way he skipped over me in discussions, despite me being the only one with data going back to fiscal year 2015. He said it in how he praised interns for bringing new energy, while ignoring the fact that I was mentoring half of them. I said nothing. I smiled when spoken to. I attended the extra meetings and took notes I never shared. I let him believe I was harmless, because the truth is, I had no intention of being remembered as the nice lady who used to sit near the coffee machine. What Ryan didn't know, what no one outside the boardroom knew, was that I owned 52% of this company, acquired quietly, methodically, over the past decade, as old shareholders bowed out and new ventures distracted younger ones. I was the silent majority, the real decision-maker. But I never flaunted it. Why would I? Power is quieter when it's real. Then came the moment. The hallway ambush. I was coming back from a call with a vendor when Ryan cornered me near the elevators. "You need to start thinking about how you fit into the new structure," he said, arms crossed, that condescending lean that men use when they think they're being firm but fair. "You're replaceable, you know. You're nobody here." I smiled, not wide, just enough. "Try firing me," I said. He blinked, confused, thought I was bluffing. I stepped into the elevator, turned just before the doors closed. "Next board meeting's going to be fun, don't you think?" And just like that, the game had begun. I didn't sleep much after that elevator moment. Not because I was nervous, quite the opposite. It was the satisfaction, the delicious irony of it all. Ryan's words echoed in my mind like a bad motivational podcast. "You're replaceable. You're nobody here." I almost felt bad for him. Almost. What Ryan didn't know, and what I'd ensured no one could ever trace, was that during one of this company's darkest chapters, I became its silent guardian. It was 2017. A hostile acquisition was looming, whispers of layoffs were swirling, and the founding partners were fighting like toddlers over dwindling reserves. We were weeks away from being absorbed by a vulture fund that would have gutted every department, replaced real workers with outsourced scripts, and turned this place into a shell with a logo. That was when I made the call. I had just received my inheritance, just over 7 figures, from my grandfather. A man who, ironically, had built his fortune from cautious silence and bold investments. I took nearly all of it and purchased a block of shares through an external holding company registered in Luxembourg. No one knew the name on the papers. No one thought to ask who stood behind Linden Ridge Holdings Lelallet. That was me, Lynette from the analyst desk. The quiet one with a cardigan obsession and a desk plant named Gerald. The purchase made me majority shareholder. Barely. 52%. But enough to stop the sale cold. Enough to tip the scales in board votes. Enough to install protections that would keep our core teams from being carved up like yesterday's PowerPoint. I didn't tell anyone. Not even my best friend in HR, not the CFO, not even my mother. Because if they knew, the power would lose its shape. I didn't want to lead with it. I didn't want to be seen through it. I wanted to be here, to do the work, to keep the company steady, and to protect it from within. A ghost in the machine, pulling strings only when absolutely necessary. And for 6 years, it worked. I rebuilt my savings. I took no dividends beyond my salary. I let the CEO make the public decisions. I didn't interfere unless I had to. Stability was my currency, my quiet reign. Until Ryan. He was already making moves by the end of week 2, slashing budgets, replacing mid-level managers with strategic consultants, and hinting in meetings that legacy knowledge was a bottleneck to agility. I knew what he meant. He saw people like me as a drag on his rise. And maybe we were, to men who wanted to climb fast and crash hard. One afternoon, he stood in front of the data visualization team and said, "This place is too comfortable. If you're not scared for your job, you're not innovating." I watched faces freeze. These were good people, talented, loyal. Some had built their entire careers here, and he was treating them like disposable batteries. That night, I called my broker and asked for the latest movement on Class A shares. As expected, Ryan had convinced one of the smaller shareholders to proxy vote his shares to back an efficiency realignment plan. Cute. He was playing chess. Unfortunately for him, I was the board. I updated the proxy agreements for my holding company. Subtle tweaks. Just enough to let me vote directly at the next shareholder meeting. I wanted to be there in person when his smug face realized the floor beneath him was made of glass, and I held the switch for the spotlight. I still didn't tell anyone. It wasn't time. Let him keep thinking I was just another replaceable cog. The days leading to the board meeting were oddly serene. Ryan avoided me after our elevator exchange. Probably assumed I was bluffing. Maybe he figured I was just another older employee terrified of change. He still didn't realize he was rearranging furniture on a ship I owned. But I did notice he started watching me. Not overtly, he wasn't smart enough to be subtle, but there were more eyes in meetings. Notes passed behind backs. One morning, I found an anonymous suggestion in the HR portal recommending I be moved to a different team to increase operational flexibility. I laughed out loud in my office. Gerald, the desk plant, almost fell over from the vibrations. The best part? I didn't need to fire him. He'd do it himself. All I had to do was wait. It happened on a Thursday. The kind of Thursday that pretended to be quiet, but smelled faintly of trouble. You know that scent, like fresh toner and just boiled lies? I was halfway through a quarterly forecast model, headphones in, one eyebrow raised at a revenue line that made no mathematical sense, when my Slack pinged. "Can you come to conference room C? Now." M. No subject line, no explanation, just now. Mason Parker, my direct manager, wasn't usually abrupt. If anything, he was a chronic email drafter. The kind who rewrote "Hi Lynette, hope your week is going well" 3 times before sending. So a message like that? I knew something was off. I saved my spreadsheet, closed the tab, and stood. No dramatic pause. Just a breath and a nod to Gerald. He'd seen worse. Conference room C was at the far end of the hallway, past the glass partition that separated the strategic wing from U.S. regular mortals. I walked in without knocking. Mason was already seated, flanked by Caroline from HR, which told me everything before anyone opened their mouth. He didn't meet my eyes. "Thanks for coming," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him like this was a normal 9 a.m. sink. I didn't sit. I folded my arms loosely and waited. Mason cleared his throat. "I've been reviewing departmental performance with Ryan." "Of course." Ryan's fingerprints were all over this. "And," he continued, suddenly fascinated by his own notepad, "there are concerns about your team's output, about your personal engagement levels, and frankly, some of your methods are becoming a bit outdated." He paused, as if waiting for me to object. I didn't. Caroline blinked slowly, probably rehearsing the legal lines she'd memorized for such meetings. "We feel you've become—" Mason hesitated again, as if the words might taste wrong. "Unmotivated, resistant to change. You haven't demonstrated a proactive mindset toward the company's new direction." He was quoting Ryan, word for word. "And what does that mean?" I asked, my tone flat. "You're firing me?" Mason looked startled. "Well, no, not yet, but—" "Then fire me," I said calmly. His mouth parted slightly, confused. That wasn't the script. That wasn't what women like me were supposed to say. I was supposed to panic, plead, promise to be better. I was supposed to clutch at the edge of the desk and ask for one more chance. Instead, I stood there like I had nowhere to go and all the time in the world. "I'm giving you a chance to transition," he said, his voice slightly thinner now, "to explore alternative options within the company." "Alternative options," I repeated with a tilt of my head. "I've been here 8 years. I know when a firing is just waiting for an email." "No one's firing you," Caroline interjected, her voice soft but firm, as if that made it better. "We're just initiating a conversation about potential alignment opportunities." "Alignment," I repeated. What a lovely, bloodless word. I turned to Mason again. If this is Ryan's idea, he should have the guts to say it to my face. But since he's busy dismantling things he doesn't understand, you'll deliver the blow for him, yes? "I'm trying to help you, Lynette." "No, you're trying to get me to make it easy for you." The silence between us stretched like glass about to crack. Then I reached for the door. "Lynette," Mason said quickly, his voice now tinged with something he hadn't expected. Maybe fear, maybe curiosity. "I just don't understand why you're not upset." I paused, hand on the handle. "You will," I said, with a small, unreadable smile. "At the next board meeting." And with that, I walked out. No tears, no scene. Just the steady sound of my heels on tile, and the dull thud of a truth they wouldn't grasp until it was far too late. They always notice when you don't flinch. By Friday, the whispers had started. Quiet at first, muffled behind coffee mugs, and just loud enough bathroom chatter. "Did you see her face? She didn't even argue. Is she already packing up? Maybe she's got a job lined up?" No one takes a hit like that and walks out smiling. But I hadn't smiled. Not really. It was a different kind of expression, one they didn't recognize. It wasn't defeat, it wasn't resignation, it was patience, and that terrified them more. I made no changes to my schedule. I showed up on time. I answered emails. I submitted my usual pristine reports. And I said nothing. Because silence in an office like ours wasn't passive. It was dangerous. It made people lean in closer, afraid they'd missed something. Mason avoided me in the hall. Ryan didn't even look my way. Not that he was short on other targets. He'd gone into full restructure mode. A term that, in corporate speak, means burn the old furniture and crown the interns. 3 senior engineers were dismissed that week. A procurement lead was given a generous exit package. Our beloved office manager, who knew every code, contact, and compliance loophole, was replaced with a cheerful, clipboard-wielding 26-year-old who once asked me how to undo an Excel. The explanation was always the same: efficiency, culture fit, new energy. But everyone knew what it really was: Loyalty harvesting. Ryan was planting his own people like flags. Young, eager, indebted. The kind who would see his decisions as gospel, because questioning him meant questioning the hand that fed them. Hi. By the second week, the mood on the floor had changed completely. People stopped speaking freely. Desks were cleared at lunch. Jokes disappeared from Slack. Even the elevator rides felt like confessionals. And through it all, I waited. Because Ryan still didn't know. He didn't know that every change he made, every new policy, every contract termination, every budget he restructured, needed board-level ratification if it touched certain strategic departments. And guess whose signature was required for that? Mine. Well, not my name exactly, but the holding company's voting rep, Linden Ridge Holdings, a mysterious, silent partner known only through quarterly minutes and dry resolutions, which meant Ryan, in all his fervor, was slicing wires he didn't even know were live. But I didn't stop him. Not yet. Because sometimes the best way to reveal rot is to let the termites finish their feast. Let him keep firing the institutional knowledge. Let him keep surrounding himself with yes-men and barely trained minimes. Let him turn the place into an echo chamber where competence went to die. I wasn't going to save him from the consequences, but I would watch. I kept my eyes open and my mouth shut, and behind the scenes, I began collecting. Quiet notes on the restructuring decisions, a list of all the terminations and their justifications, budget shifts, the names of every person Ryan fast-tracked without proper reviews. I started tagging files with innocuous names, Q3 forecast notes, meeting summary drafts, but inside them were timelines, red flags, and cross-referenced policies. Documentation, patterns, oversteps. I wasn't going to use them yet. Not until he crossed the line. And he would. They always do. The beautiful thing about men like Ryan? They always mistake silence for surrender. And I had nothing but time. It happened on a Wednesday. Again. There's something about midweek that makes corporate betrayal feel especially surgical. I was reviewing a cross-departmental budget proposal, a task so dry it could exfoliate your soul, when I noticed something odd. There was no allocation listed for our division, not a cut, not a trim, just absence, like someone had edited us out of existence and hoped no one would notice. I blinked, reopened the file, checked the metadata. It was Ryan's strategic realignment plan. Draft 3.2, labeled Confidential Do Not Distribute. Too late for that. I scrolled through page after page of the usual jargon: vertical integration, agile transformation, operational streamlining. It all sounded impressive if you didn't know what any of it meant. But then I saw the section titles: Core Operations, Revenue Growth Engines, Future Talent Pool, Strategic Transition Priorities, and then nothing. No mention of analytics. No mention of my team. Not even a courtesy nod like department pending review. We were just gone. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like a pulse I no longer had. Later that afternoon, I got a call from Philip, the company's general counsel. A cautious man. He once took 5 days to approve a lunch expense policy because he didn't like the phrasing on reasonable costs. "Hey, Lynette," he said, his voice tight. "Quick question. Have you seen the latest iteration of Ryan's strategic plan?" "I have," I said coolly. "There's a note," he continued, "on the page where analytics used to be. Says, realignment pending shareholder majority approval." I let that sit for a beat. Philip chuckled nervously, mistaking my silence. "Wild, huh? As if anyone has a controlling interest anymore." "Yeah," I said. "Wild." We hung up. I turned back to the screen, reread the phrase, pending shareholder majority approval, like it was just a formality, like it was a box to check. I closed the file, opened another. This one wasn't on any shared drive. It was the control doc from Linden Ridge Holdings, my holding company, the one with the proxy access to 52% of the company's Class A shares. I logged in, updated the internal voting profile, and confirmed something I already knew. no strategic realignment of operational divisions could go through without a recorded vote from the majority shareholder, which was me. I sat back in my chair. Ryan hadn't just deleted my team. He'd written his own undoing and tagged me for approval, and so began the next phase of my preparation. That night, I printed the entire strategic plan, all 97 pages, highlighting every reference to workflow changes, personnel reassignments, and vague euphemisms for firing experienced people. Then I opened my data archive and ran a retrospective on every metric analytics had touched over the last 3 quarters: customer retention, revenue forecasting, product churn rate. All of it. The numbers spoke for themselves. I created a side-by-side, projections with analytics and projections without. The difference? Roughly 12.8 million in preventable losses over the next 18 months, give or take. I formatted the deck in clean, quiet blues. No flashy transitions, just facts and fallacy listed side by side. Then I printed my proxy documents, folded them neatly into a slim navy folder, topped it with a single tab: Linden Ridge, Board Authority. The next board meeting was 4 days away, and I had every intention of making it unforgettable. The boardroom was colder than usual. Not physically, just the kind of cold that hums beneath polished surfaces and expensive pens. That quiet tension before a storm, someone's still smiling through. Ryan was already there when I arrived, standing near the head of the long obsidian table like a startup messiah about to deliver a TED Talk. He wore his power suit, slim fit, no tie, sleeves rolled exactly once. That calculated, "I'm just one of you, but also your future boss" look. I took my usual seat near the middle. No one looked twice. No one ever did. The board members trickled in. 7 of them, all old enough to remember the .com crash and smug enough to believe they'd predicted it. I knew them by name, temperament, and voting pattern. Some leaned cautious, some leaned flashy. None knew who really owned the company. Not yet. Ryan opened with a performance. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice smooth. "I want to walk you through my final draft of the Strategic Realignment Initiative. We're at a pivotal moment. Too lean to be slow, too big to be sloppy. This plan," he said, sliding a glossy deck across the table, "streamlines legacy operations and positions us for aggressive market growth." He tapped the 3rd page. "We've already begun executing Phase 1, departmental shifts, talent realignment, executive consolidation, all done with minimal friction." I watched the others nod slowly, flipping pages. They loved the buzzwords. To them, change, even reckless change, sounded like progress. "And the final phase?" asked one of the external advisors. Ryan smiled. "Final approval pending. Shareholder majority vote, of course." He said it like a joke, like a box that was already checked. That's when I slid my folder onto the table. "I do not approve," I said clearly. The room went still. Ryan's smile didn't falter. Yet. "I'm sorry?" "I said," I repeated, opening the folder and revealing the signed proxy documentation. "I do not approve. As majority shareholder of this company, I'm vetoing your strategic realignment plan in full." He stared at the folder, at the clean lettering on the top. Linden Ridge Holdings, Voting Authority Certification. "Wait, what are you talking about?" He laughed, but the sound had a crack in it. "Lynette, you're not a shareholder." "Not directly, no," I said. "But I own 52% of this company through an external entity, acquired over time, legally, and fully disclosed where it matters." I turned to the board. "All documents are filed. I have voting rights, and I'm exercising them now." The room had gone absolutely silent. One of the advisors cleared his throat. "Is this true?" I pulled out the notarized letter from our corporate counsel and slid it over. "Here's verification of the ownership structure, including a list of the proxy shares. I've been silent because I believed in this company's mission, but I will not let it be gutted by someone who sees legacy as a liability and chaos as strategy." Ryan's face shifted. Not anger, not denial, just confusion. He was so sure of himself, so sure the room was his. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, but couldn't quite understand what he was looking at. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "You didn't bother to ask." The board murmured, flipping through the documents, eyes darting from the figures to Ryan to me. And just like that, the room, his room, wasn't his anymore. Ryan didn't say another word that day. After the meeting ended, with the board officially tabling the entire realignment plan, pending further shareholder review, he stood frozen for just a breath too long. Then he gathered his deck with movements that weren't quite smooth anymore, like his arms had forgotten how to be confident. He didn't look at me as he left the room. Not once. But the others did. Board members who had never learned my last name suddenly nodded at me like I had emerged from fog carrying a flaming sword. Advisors who had ignored my insights for years paused to ask if I'd stayed in touch with legal or needed a follow-up chat. But none of that compared to what happened in the corridors. People looked at me differently, not with pity, not even curiosity, with something else. Recognition. It started small, someone holding the elevator for me when they never had before. A younger associate from compliance, nodding at me like I was part of a secret rebellion. Even our new receptionist, just 2 weeks into the job, offered a shy smile as I walked by. Then came the messages. Anonymous at first, sent through throwaway internal inboxes, from people I didn't even know. "Thank you for what you did at the board meeting." I was starting to think no one could stop him. He fired me after 11 years and told HR I was non-strategic. I had trained him on our client model. He made me cry in a meeting once, told me I was the reason innovation dies in mid-sized companies. Most didn't ask for anything. They just wanted to be heard. To say, he hurt me too. I saved every message, created a secure file. Not because I planned on confronting him with it, not yet, but because I knew his silence wouldn't last. People like Ryan don't lose power, they adapt it. Like mold, like a virus. He wouldn't come at me directly anymore. The boardroom had seen that play. Now he'd pivot, he'd manipulate, influence, cast doubts in rooms I wasn't in, plant seeds of concern about my judgment, my motives, frame me as emotional, unstable, or worse, vindictive. It would be subtle, measured, executed through others. I'd seen it before. I was ready. I spent the next few days doing what I did best, watching, listening, building quiet alliances. The data team I'd protected during the budget slashes started looping me into project updates again, unofficially. A lead from marketing, newly promoted under Ryan's regime, sent me a calendar invite titled Cross-Departmental Chat, but the meeting was really about asking how to survive Ryan's erratic priorities. I didn't pretend to be a hero. I just answered their questions. I gave them tools. Because if Ryan wanted a war, he'd have to fight more than me. He'd have to fight the very structure he didn't understand. The one I'd been building quietly for years, beneath the radar. Not a rebellion. A reckoning. It started with a calendar change. My weekly metrics sync with the product team. Scheduled, confirmed, same time for the last 18 months. Vanished. No explanation. Just gone. When I followed up, I got a polite message from someone 2 levels below me. Ryan asked us to streamline the update process. He'll be consolidating that info now. Next came the access restrictions. The data dashboards I'd helped design, the same ones used for strategic forecasting and board reports, prompted an access denied notice when I logged in. I filed a ticket. IT responded with an apologetic shrug. We were told to restrict to executive-level clearance pending reauthorization. Pending reauthorization. Like I was a guest in a house I built. I wasn't surprised. This was the next move in Ryan's playbook, the silent squeeze. He didn't fire people twice. Once publicly, then again privately, through erosion. Not with pink slips, but with locked doors. Meetings rebooked, accidentally. Agendas changed last minute. My name removed from emails I used to lead. My face missing from presentation decks. It all looked formal, rational, organizationally expedient. But I'd lived through enough restructurings to know what this was. It was a dismissal, the kind that doesn't say you're fired, but makes staying so impossible, so hollow, that eventually you pack your things just to keep your sanity. I didn't. Instead, I documented every accidental exclusion, every revised invite, every time someone forwarded me a file I no longer had access to with the awkward preface. Thought you might still want to see this. I built a timeline, date, event, impact, source, screenshots of deleted calendar items, archived emails showing I was removed from threads, copies of Slack messages with subtle digs or vague instructions that made no sense, until you realized they were meant to isolate me. I knew what he was doing. He was trying to build a case, not a legal one, a psychological one, to wear me down, make me feel peripheral, non-essential, like a ghost still haunting the place, waiting to be told to leave. But he made one mistake. He thought silence meant defeat. He didn't understand that silence can be strategy. And mine was building. Because every time he clipped my wings, I documented the knife he used. Every time he erased me from a process, I made a note of how many others it impacted, how much slower, sloppier, and less secure the workflow became without oversight. He thought he was pushing me out, but I was building a record. Not for HR, not even for legal, for the board. And when the moment came, when he finally pushed too far, I wouldn't just push back. I'd present Exhibit A through Z, because the difference between a dismissal and a mistake is how well you can prove the intention. And Ryan was writing his intention in bold, invisible ink. I was just making it visible. Philip, the company lawyer, asked to meet me in person. That alone was a red flag. Philip didn't meet. He emailed, he documented, he CC'd. But on a dreary Tuesday afternoon, he invited me to his office and closed the door behind me with more gravity than I'd ever seen him use. "I've reviewed your records," he said, tapping the thick folder I'd submitted under internal interference. Ryan Wells. "How everything's time-stamped, cross-referenced. I can't dispute a single line." He paused. "Lynette, this isn't just internal sabotage. It borders on misconduct, retaliation, possibly constructive dismissal. You need to file an official complaint." I didn't speak right away. It wasn't that I needed time. I needed precision. "If I do," I said, "I want it escalated, not brushed aside with a coaching recommendation or a professional development course. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's calculated." Philip nodded slowly. "Understood. I'll escalate it directly to the board's executive chairman. He'll meet with you privately." And he did. 2 days later, I sat across from Chairman Edward Grant, a man who had survived the worst years of the company with his integrity intact and his suits always 2 sizes too large. He had never looked at me more than twice in passing, but that day, he watched me like someone finally seeing a locked vault swing open. I laid everything out, my timeline, my data, my documentation. He listened without interruption. Then I handed him the real file. A separate folder, thicker than the first. Anonymous statements. Testimonies from employees who'd been pushed, humiliated, silenced. Some fired. Some left voluntarily, feeling like they had no choice. I'd scrubbed identifiers, rewritten names, but the voices were real and brutal in their honesty. He told me my experience was irrelevant now. He rewrote my work and gave someone else the credit. I was in therapy after 2 months on his team. Edward read in silence. When he looked up, there was no confusion in his face. Only resolution. "I'm calling an emergency session of the ethics committee," he said. "I want you to testify." And just like that, the machine began to move. The committee would meet in 5 days. I'd be allowed to present, uninterrupted. They would question me afterward, but the time would be mine. So I prepared. Every night that week, I worked through the statements, reordering them, structuring the sequence, building a narrative not just of wrongdoing, but of rot. I organized my own documentation as a scaffold. Here is where the corrosion began, and here is how it spread. I made no appeals to emotion, only truth, only impact. I practiced my opening line at least 50 times. This is not about personality. It's about power and how it was used to erase, manipulate, and harm. When I finished my rehearsal, I stared at the folder in my lap, the one that bore every name he'd tried to forget, every voice he tried to silence. Ryan thought he'd removed me. He didn't know I was building a courtroom, and his trial was about to begin. The room was silent when he entered. Ryan walked into the ethics committee chamber with the same smooth gait he always used, but the energy around him had changed. There was no applause, no nods, no reassuring glances from colleagues, just a heavy quiet, the kind that feels like a trap already sprung. He sat on the far side of the long oak table. His suit was flawless, his expression carefully neutral. If he was nervous, it didn't show. At first. The chairman cleared his throat. "We'll begin with Director Ryan Wells. You have 10 minutes. Ryan stood, smoothed his lapels, and launched into the performance. "What we've had here," he said, "is a clash of perspectives, a difference in leadership styles. In any transitional period, there will be friction, especially when innovation meets legacy systems." He turned toward the committee, hands open as if in prayer. "My intent has never been punitive," he continued. "It's always been about progress. Tough decisions were made, yes, but necessary ones. I respect Lynette's service to this company, but resistance to change cannot paralyze strategic momentum." He spoke as if this were a motivational retreat, as if I were just a case study in stubbornness. When he sat down, the room remained still. Then it was my turn. I didn't rise right away. I took a moment, as if letting his words settle, then quietly turned the first page of my folder. "I won't speak in abstractions," I said, standing. "I'll speak in dates." I began with the calendar deletions, the access denials, the meetings I was removed from. I provided emails, metadata, screenshots. Then I moved to the contradiction at the core of it all. "Here," I said, holding up one document, "is where I was removed from a data pipeline I'd built. And here," I continued, showing another, "is where Ryan later cited my lack of involvement as justification for my exclusion from strategic discussions." I let the implication linger. You cannot accuse someone of absence after you've locked the door from the inside. Then I opened the second folder, the one filled with testimony. I read 3 statements aloud, one from a junior analyst, one from a dismissed engineer, one from a manager who resigned after what she called systematic psychological warfare. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look at Ryan. I just kept building the case, fact by fact, line by line, until the room felt too full to breathe. When I finished, I returned to my seat without flourish. The silence afterward was different than before, heavier, final. The committee conferred privately for less than 10 minutes. When they returned, Chairman Grant looked first at Ryan. "Effective immediately, Ryan Wells is suspended from all operational duties, pending formal termination review. The board will appoint an interim operations lead within the week." He didn't argue. For the first time since he arrived, Ryan said nothing. No one clapped, no one smiled. It wasn't a moment of celebration, it was a correction. After the meeting, as the committee members filed out, some nodded at me. A few whispered thank yous. I didn't linger. I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, and resumed the work Ryan had tried to destroy, not because I needed recognition, but because the company needed rebuilding. And now, it had someone steady at the helm, even if no one could see her crown. Silence settled over the company in the days that followed, but not the suffocating kind we had lived under for months. This silence was different. It was peaceful. The whispering stopped. The darting eyes, the second-guessing, the tension that wrapped around every department like a wire pulled too tight. It all unraveled, quietly, like someone had opened a window and let the air back in. The board appointed me interim director of operations within 48 hours. No ceremony, no press release, just a unanimous vote. I didn't waste time. Access was restored. Files reopened. Dashboards reconnected. Teams that had been siloed were invited, urgently and sincerely, back into the room. I walked the floor every morning. I hosted open forums instead of closed meetings. I sat in break rooms, asked questions, listened. I didn't promise miracles, just honesty, clarity, a path back to stability. And slowly, they began to trust again. Messages came in, quiet thank yous, shy words of appreciation, some from people I'd never spoken to before. We can breathe again. This is the first time I felt safe in a meeting in months. You make us feel like we matter. I never called myself a leader, but now they did. And that was enough. Because leadership, I'd learned, isn't about the power you hold. It's about the weight you're willing to carry for others. And I carried it in silence, until the silence was no longer something to fear, but something we could finally build from, together.